Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today, we have Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Doing well.
Good.
Doing well.
Good. Good.
And we're going to try to repair a few problems in the world.
Well, we'll see.
Endless job.
Yeah.
You know, I always say when you're involved in politics and it's hard work and you have to travel and do all that, and you get a gathering together, you should try to have a little fun, even though it's bad. But there are some days it's hard to forget about the monstrosities. Well, I wouldn't call the top monstrosity, but it sure doesn't lend much to saying common sense is coming to the people. The governments are waking up and this sort of thing. There's still a lot of problems. I want to start off by talking about something. This thing I have in front of me. It says featured article by Daniel McAdams.
Wow,
I'll tell you. So this is your real expertise here, and, as usual. But it has to do with a journalistic agency, data journalistic agency, which is somebody going to watch out and make sure that we and others, and I think this report that we have here actually named the Liberty Committee and the Institute and Ron Paul and Rand Paul and a lot of other friends, a lot of people, and saying these aren't friends, to Israel. And,
Ukraine,
Ukraine,
yeah.
And they're not voting for the weapons, and they're not voting for the money, and they should be watched. But there were a lot of people on the list. It's sort of a modified thing of canceling people, we have heard a lot about that, but they didn't do this to honor. If you're on the list, they weren't honoring the people on the list. They say, look out for these guys. We got to do something with them. They're not voting for enough money, and they don't support Israel as well.
Ukraine, yeah.
So they don't support the Ukrainians, and and if you're on the list, some people might think you're anti-Russian or something like that. So. What do you think is going to come of this? Is this going to be a big story in the news this weekend?
Well, it's a big thing. This report came out at the end of the week on Friday last week. If we can put that first clip up. So this is this organization is called Texty, and the thing that's important about it, Dr. Paul, a couple of things. First of all, they put out this list, and this list contains 391 individuals and 76 organizations, including politicians, political movements and groups, media and journalists, experts and think tanks. These are the people on their hate list, on their enemies list. And it's a Ukrainian organization that put this out. And it's called From Trumpists to Communists, the Forces in the U.S. Impeding Aid to Ukraine and How They Do It. Go to the next clip. Here's a little bit more about it from a piece that I wrote when it first came out. The U.S. government-affiliated Ukrainian web publication, Data Journalism Agency, has just released a report attacking hundreds of prominent American individuals and organizations as enemies for not supporting sending more U.S. money and weapons to Ukraine. So, and actually go to the next one. Here, it's all these bubbles of related people who are their enemies. And it's pretty fascinating. The bigger ones, the more important bad guys have their names shown. The biggest one is Donald Trump's name, but you see Tucker Carlson's name is big. You see Ron Paul is there. In fact, I'm just up from Ron Paul, but I'm not important enough, so I don't get to have my name prominently displayed, which makes me happy. But it's kind of like you said, Dr. Paul, I look at this list and all of our friends are there. Max Blumenthal is there. Angela McArdle, we just saw her a while ago. Anya Parampil is there. Tucker Carlson, Colonel Doug McGregor. We would think of this as a good, Rand Paul, Jim Jordan. We would think of this as a good guy list, but in fact, these are what the Ukrainians, this organization believes are bad guys. And the thing about, actually, if you go to the next one, I did a feature on their tablet. I am listed in as an expert, which I'm happy to know, but also the Ron Paul Institute is on their hate list. So the thing that's important about this, Dr. Paul, I think, is that this organization, Texty, is affiliated with the United States government, USAID and the State Department. So we are getting robbed to give money to Ukraine, and Ukraine uses some of that money to make hate lists and enemies lists of Americans.
Oh, that's right. You know, when this first came out, you had a little bit of a concern, and I thought, well, Dan must be worried about putting my name, his name, up on the list. But no, he sort of thought we'd be excluded. There were a lot of friends on this list. And and that, in a way, just the way we look at that and what's going on, and the way how twisted this is, makes it difficult for the politics of it all to work out too. And when you're in office, it's a little bit different than when you're trying to educate people in the line of a non-interventionist foreign policy, because that's what we see, the lens of non-intervention, which in many ways philosophically is a lot easier than trying to figure out the politics of all this. You know, politics is power and money and a lot of other things, and wheeling and dealing. But if you pick a principle, and the founders worked more in this manner because their advice was very strong: stay out of the entangling alliances and don't get messed up with Europe. And they explicitly said, well, maybe my memory isn't right. I don't think they explicitly said, don't join NATO or the United Nations. But anyway, we're involved, and that's what they're doing. And then the mixture of taking the money, you know, from the American people and giving it to them, and then they turn around and lobby with that money, you know, and make that effort. We'll teach them a lesson. So, and some people think all foreign aid is going to help. You know, they try to play both sides. You know, we know where most of the money's going. You know, but they also say, but we want to help the Palestinians, so we're going to send them some food, and that turns almost into a farce. You know, it's politics alone, because I think I've complained about that for years, that when you have these countries that are fighting among themselves, and you send them money, or whoever, money and food, whoever's the most powerful gets hold of it. It doesn't really help the people who suffer the most. And there's a lot of people suffering over there.
Yeah, the thing is that I would wonder, because there are dozens of members of the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate that are on this list, this enemies list. I mean, if I were a member of U.S. Congress, I would go down to the floor and I would demand a clarification from the U.S. government, from the State Department, from the USAID. I would hold it up and say, I'm Jim Jordan. I'm on this hate list of a Ukrainian group that gets our money. I would like an explanation of what is U.S. policy. What is our policy toward Ukraine? Is it okay for them to make hate lists of prominent Americans? Is that okay? And in fact, now this isn't what they call the kill list, but there is another Ukrainian list called the kill list, and several journalists that were on that list have been killed, including Daria Dugina in Russia. And what's concerning about that list is that people that we know are on it, including Rand Paul, including many others. So it's a dangerous thing. These people are playing a dangerous game, and I don't understand why members, they should be down on the floor. And here's some more evidence of their connection to the U.S. government. Put on this next clip. This is Anatoly Bondarenko, and he is prominently on a U.S. government website. He is the founder of Texty.org, a co-founder of Texty.org, and here he is lecturing at a place called Tech Camp. Well, what is Tech Camp? Tech Camp is a project of the United States Department of State. He was a speaker in this State Department program. Yet more evidence, if you go to the next one, of the organization's involvement with the U.S. government. This is a project called TAPAS, USAID and UK funded Transparency and Accountability in Public Administration. If you go to the next one, now you can see this is their implementing partners. And one of those implementing partners, you can see toward the bottom, is none other than the data journalism agency Texty. So they are listed on the U.S. government website as a partner, yet this partner to the U.S. government is attacking Americans, prominent Americans in the U.S.
Yes. When you mentioned about going, to the Congress and asking some questions, one thought crossed my mind in the last several days. I never did it when I was in Congress, but the principle was always there and should be there. So when they're coming up and they want to authorize, money for which war today, but more money and weapons and policy, I would like to stand up. And this is a privileged motion. I think they have to recognize. You say, Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker, point of order. Explain to me, where do you get the money and where do you get the authority? And if somebody did that each time, of course, they'd figure out something else. The mic wouldn't work, but it doesn't take them long to dismiss the people who they don't want to hear from. Yeah. But that's really the point. That's when it's really getting bad. It's making it authentic and so-called within the rules. And of course, the way we see it, not much of what the Congress does is within the rules. They just bend the rules, and then they have all these coalitions and bipartisanship. And here, if they want to get more money to a favorite lobbyist, they do that, and they're going to feed poor people in some country, and all of a sudden, money goes to the lobbying groups. So it's what people want and what they understand and what they have been taught and what our government should be. And too many people accept the idea that we just have to have better managers. That to me is one of the worst arguments. We need a new administration because the economy is weak. We have to have different management of the economy or different management of Ukraine and on and on. And it's far different than just a management thing. It's the principle that they think somebody should manage it. It's sort of like pricing mechanisms and Federal Reserve and all that. That nobody knows. Nobody knows what the interest rates should be. So that it's this principle of them assuming either the money or the authority, and the people aren't alert enough to say enough is enough. You don't even have the authority to do it. But we have more people actually saying some of the things I'm just talking about, but then they have to overcome a lot of obstacles. That's why we have to really praise our friend Thomas Massie, because he's been able to do it in a very polite way and very principled.
The other thing that members of Congress should be going down to the floor and demanding answers to is our next story for today. And this also happened over the weekend. If you put this next one up, this is from the Middle East Eye. But if you put this next, here we go. There we go. U.S. involved in Israeli rescue operation that killed over 200 Palestinians. So over the weekend, the Israelis, with the participation of the U.S. military in Israel, they said that there was a cell of U.S. Special Forces in Israel that were participating in a raid. They took back 4. They call them hostages. In fact, 2 of them were military, members of the Israeli military. So when you're captured in your military, you're a prisoner of war. Nevertheless, to get back these 4, they killed, it looks like now, over 270 civilians, and they also killed 3 hostages, including an American citizen. So if I were a member of Congress, I would be demanding, what is going on? Where do you get the authority to participate with boots on the ground in this raid? And how do you justify what happened in this raid? We're all happy that these 4 people are free. There's no question about that. And also happy to see that they were in good health. This young gal who was released, was nice to see her hugging her father. She looked very healthy, and she didn't claim anything happened to her when she was there. But on the other side, go to the next clip, because in this raid, this is a local resident who lived through the raid. It's pretty awful, but I'm not going to show any pictures, but his description of it was, if you put it up, please. That next clip, please. Thank you. I saw dead children and body parts strewn all. I saw an elderly man killed on an animal-drawn cart. It was hell. Sounds very, very awful. And again, U.S. participation, if I'm in Congress, I'm saying, how do you get the authority to do this?
In many ways, they're implying, they won't say it because it's so foolish. Oh, this is a fair trade. Yes, Palestinians, 274 killed. But we got 4 Israelis back. Then all of a sudden they're weighing, and there's a people who can do this and not say, well, you know, there's a lot of delight in the families of these of the people who were released, but nobody really talks about, if it is, then you're in big trouble, in saying, you know, there were 274 Palestinians killed, you know, and then there were 678 wounded. And a lot of children were involved. You already mentioned this. The children were involved, and this is more. 64 of that group of the 274 were children, and but that really isn't the big point. The big point is this war is stupid. Yeah. And this war is financed by United States taxpayers. And it's the American people's complacency that can do it. Because if you had different people in government, and we should never have permitted the last 100 years of the disappearance of our republic, and everything is done for money and power, we wouldn't be facing this. But that doesn't mean it makes us want to work harder, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, oh yeah, we'll just mention that and they'll change their way. No, you have to change a whole philosophy and a whole system of government. And I see, as bad as things are right now around the world, and all the wars and the potential wars going on, I think in a way the economic and foreign policy is becoming climactic. Yeah. Something's going to give. You know, our foreign policy will change, not because we've finally elected the right people. That's always helpful. We always have to have the people speaking out about what there is available to us and what it could be replaced with. And people would say, "Oh, I heard. I guess it was our president that went off the other day. He was really," and you hear it all the time, boy, when you speak out, probably that list, isolationist, and yell and scream. And of course, that's a deception and a lie to begin with, because if you want to talk about isolation, look at what the world is doing today. We're becoming more isolationist with the foreign policy that we have.
The sanctions, yeah. Well, here's a story about how it went down, this raid went down. You know, you're going to see it. I saw just earlier some knucklehead right-wingers on Twitter saying, well, it's war. People die in war. Yeah, but as you say, there's a sense of proportionality. That's why we have laws of war. War is terrible and people do die. But, you know, you don't get to kill 300 people to save 3. You know, it doesn't, the proportionality is not there. But now this is from an antiwar.com write-up of the raid. If we can skip that one and go to the next one, this one starting local residents. Yeah, there we go. So this is from the anti-war write-up. Local residents said the Israeli special forces who carried out the raid were disguised as displaced Palestinians from Rafah and entered the camp in an aid truck. So the Israeli military denied it used an aid truck, but Israeli media reported Israeli soldiers meant to blend in as Arabs were part of the attack. So if this is accurate and this is true, I think it's probably one of the most cynical things you can imagine, because you have a starving population, you have Israeli commandos dressed as aid workers coming in an aid truck. These people are starving to death. They rush out to the aid truck and they get slaughtered. And this is actually gets even worse, Dr. Paul. This is Afsan Ratansi, who is an award-winning journalist, and here's what he's reporting. If it's true, it's even worse than that. He said, here's how the massacre unfolded. Israel used a U.S.-built humanitarian pier to sneak in a unit of Israeli soldiers and reportedly American soldiers. The soldiers boarded a humanitarian aid truck and drove to Nuseirat refugee camp. Once inside, they were discovered by Palestinians, which resulted in nonstop aerial bombardment and the soldiers opening fire inside the market, killing over 210 Palestinians and injuring hundreds. The humanitarian pier gets exposed to be an occupation, assassination, and massacre pier. So if this is true and they use that pier to sneak in dressed up as aid people and then slaughtered, that is really awful.
You know, the money is a big issue, but the other thing that they think they can duck is they come up probably feeling a little bit of guilt about you know, the moral aspect of this. And they think if they don't have boots on the ground, they're morally clean. They probably know better, but they have to say something for the public. Oh, no, we don't have troops on the ground. And that's usually a lie. You know, that the troops are on the ground. Like right now, were those troops that were helping us? Who was operating the drones?
Yeah.
So it's on and on. So we have a lot of changes, but fundamentally, the principles of a foreign policy and being more attuned to what the founders suggested and what the Constitution permits is necessary. Otherwise, we're not going to just have, right now, people, you know, bipartisan. I think it's so useless because, yes, there's good guys on each side and there's some that are coming together. But right now, even within the parties, which is probably a good thing, they're splitting up. And so this bipartisanship of bringing the Republicans and Democrats in the leadership, and they support the funding.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to a fascinating interview that we saw over the weekend. Thomas Massie was on with Tucker Carlson, and it was a long interview. I think Massie was really at his best. I mean, it was a fascinating interview, but there was one particular part that not only stuck out, but has been written about a lot, and so we noticed it. And this is a claim that Thomas Massie made in the interview. Now, this is a media write-up of it. If you go to the next, not here quite yet. Go to the clip. Go forward. There we go. So this is the headline: House Republican claims every GOP colleague has an AIPAC babysitter, pressuring them to cast pro-Israel votes. A very fascinating claim. And in fact, let's listen to the first minute and 5 seconds of this little segment of this where he explains what he's talking about. You might want to get that earpiece in, Dr. Paul, and let's listen to a minute and 5 seconds of Massie explaining to Tucker.
They're not registered.
Is there any other Republican who has your views on this?
Well, I have Republicans who come to me on the floor and say, I wish I could vote with you today. Yours is the right vote, but I would just take too much flack back home. And I have Republicans who come to me and say, that's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person. By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, firmly embedded in AIPAC. And
every member has something like this?
I don't know how it works on the Democrat side, but that's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to DC, you go have lunch with them, and they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them. So I've had
that's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, "I'll talk to my AIPAC person."
Okay, that's we got a good chunk of that. Very interesting.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure this out, because I've been racking my brain and I can't remember who my sitter was.
Your babysitter.
But I'll bet you Thomas doesn't pay much attention to his sitter.
Well, he said he's the only one that doesn't have one.
Yeah. And that was the case. I felt a bit of freedom because nobody bugged me with that. And it wasn't just AIPAC, but it was the rest of them, because it was once you establish a position, instead of them, in normal times holding it against you, now they get pretty rough and nasty and put your name on a list, no matter what. But that is sure is a shame. And but Thomas sure does a great job.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a post on Twitter X the day that it came out, and I also mentioned, it didn't really happen in your office, but the other thing that did happen is when the official AIPAC left, a lot of the kids would circle back and talk to you because they disagreed with their own parents, so they wanted to get your autograph. So, they knew, and they certainly have the right to petition their members of Congress. But as you correctly say, Dr. Paul, if you're known as a person of principle, like you were and how Thomas Massie is, they don't bother you because they know. And he even said it in the interview, and I encourage people to listen to it. He's saying, look, I would tell them, don't take it personal. I vote against all foreign aid, not just foreign aid to you, So it's interesting. But so as Tucker as Massie outlines this incredible amount of influence that a foreign country has, at the same time, put on that next clip, Trump says something completely the opposite. And if you put on that next one, Trump complains about the Israel lobby losing influence in office in Congress. He went on Fox News and he said, they don't have hardly any power at all. He said, Israel was the most powerful lobby in the country 15 years ago. Today, between Tlaib and AOC, all of these people, what they're doing, Israel, they don't have the backing they once did. And he says one other thing, Dr. Paul, if you put this next one on, and this is curious. He says 15 years, this is an earlier interview, he said some 15 years ago, Israel had the strongest lobby. If you were a politician, you couldn't say anything bad about Israel. It would be the end of your career. He's almost saying that like it's a good thing, He thought it was nice that you couldn't criticize any foreign country.
When I was there were some very decent conservatives, voted, conservatively very often. But when it came to this subject, the congressman's position was they should become a state. We should just make them a state, and that would solve all the problems.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know what you would always say that, I think my position is actually better for Israel. I think we're more helpful by not treating them as if they're a state.
It would be so much better. And going step back to when there was a time when there was less foreign interference, it was a much happier place. But it's not there now. And but the toughest job we have, and the members of Congress, Thomas pointed the fact that his constituents, how am I going to go back and explain it to them? And I remember when the Patriot Act was passed, and I was sitting beside somebody, and he usually voted with me, but he didn't on this time. I said, why are you doing this? The Patriot Act. He says, well, how am I going to go home and tell my constituent? Of course, my answer was, that's your job.
Yeah, really.
That's your job. You're paid for. But they don't know. It's sort of like they are, it's sort of the psychology of pure democracy. What's the majority say to keep my job? It isn't like I'm a leader and I told you I believe in the Constitution. I took an oath. I'm supposed to help you along in understanding that. No, it's not that at all. It's just you use it to move on their careers, and they do think about their careers. Well, I've worked 10 years to get this seat, and now I'm about to become a chairman of a committee. Well, but I have to raise $2 more million before January in order to lobby, pay enough people to get my votes to become a chairman.
What a racket.
One thing I had, which was, helpful to me, I had no desire because I understood the system. You have power to do the wrong thing, and that's the way they do it.
Yeah. Well, we'll end it on kind of a more positive note, which is that, and if you'll move ahead to that Michael Tracy tweet, we go back to Michael often. He's a cynic, but he's a pretty smart guy. Now, there's a new poll that just came out, a CBS News poll. Now, while Congress is falling all over itself, making sure its babysitters are happy in AIPAC, a new poll came out showing that 61% of Americans say the U.S. should not send weapons to Israel. A solid majority of Americans, and that would include 77% of Democrats should not send weapons. But even among Republicans, 38%, almost 4 in 10. While still a minority, it's a significant number, he writes. These Republicans have virtually zero representation in Congress. 38% of all Republican voters, as Michael points out, have zero representation in Congress. They don't want this. They're tired of this relationship. They feel it's toxic. They want a divorce. But of course, Congress, as usual, is on the trailing edge of these things.
That's right. And Jessica Piper, a writer of this issue, has a quote here. She says, AIPAC sees support for Israel as bipartisan. That's true. And its donors come from both parties. But its practice of sending money from GOP donors into Democratic races has enraged him. You put that together with the Palestinian-Israeli arguments that are going on, and that is a big deal as far as I'm concerned of how much of an impact they've had. And they get big crowds out, they close down universities, and the whole works. So this is not, not smooth sailing. Maybe that's what somebody that you just quoted was sort of longing for again. So when it was all uniform and there wasn't all this device. But that to me is a result. To me it's logical. When you run out of money and you run out of moral standards, anything goes.
Yeah.
It's whoever can get away with it, and if because I believe they become nihilistic, at least, and nihilism, and they don't believe there is a basic principle. They don't believe there's a higher law, and they don't believe there's a moral standard. So that doesn't bother them. So they just march on. And once you give up that principle, the best principle they have is you can do whatever you get away with.
Yeah.
And that's about the way Washington works. And then when the country becomes more bankrupt, the more they're scurrying around because I better get my share before they run out of money or run out of wealth. So I better find out where I'm moving to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my final word is to remind everyone it's a new week. Put on that last clip. It's a new week and a new opportunity to get your tickets and join us on October 31st in Dulles, Virginia, near the airport, the Liberty Platform. And I think this photo captures exactly what our intentions are. We want to be that flower growing up in this nasty concrete. We want to provide an example of beauty and nature. And I'll start announcing some speakers, but for those of you who trust us, we've always given a good show, a great set of speakers. We have a discounted early bird ticket available right now. Save a little bit of money and get those tickets. I have a link in the description to where you can get those tickets. We look forward to seeing you at the end of August. Over to you, Dr. Paul.
You know, we're not going to have our way and have peace come about and we become non-interventionists. But under these conditions, there's been a lot of very serious people quite willing to promote ceasefires on both sides. I don't understand why they can't do that. I think I have the thing that I believe happens is each side thinks, oh, we have the upper hand and we're going to gain much by doing this and that. But when it's so bad, there's a pseudo ceasefire now going on, but it's not worth much. But they should start with a ceasefire, and they should start with get the foreign troops out of these lands. And in our case, in America, we should not make it complicated. Just bring the troops home. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.